Okay, so let's start the next part of our seminar, of our conference, the panel discussion with all of the NQF partners. I will be the moderator of the discussion, and we organized this panel in, let's say, 2 rounds. In the first round, I would like to ask questions to our panelists, and then we will have some time for the discussion with the audience. So if you had questions to our panelists during the presentation, or if there are any questions emerges during the discussions, please keep them, as we would like to have this interaction session. Okay, so my dearest colleagues, please allow me to ask the first question. Today we've heard about different solutions in different countries. Could you indicate any topics, solutions from other country of yours which you found interesting or inspiring? Yes, worth discussing. Maybe we could start from Anne. Yeah.
She told me she would be the last.
It's okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Horazi. What I found, what's the word, consoling and fortunate is that each country, even though there are commonalities of framework levels and referencing to international meta frameworks, that they are responding to the actual indigenous local needs of the country and being localized in that way. Like all good development, it needs to be stitched in where it will take root and grow, or take advantage of what is growing there already, rather than importing an entirely new set of plants. So I think that is a consolation, that the subsidiarity principle is so strong, and I welcome that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this general comment. Yeah, and Mila?
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, first of all, I would in some way agree with Anne. And in addition, I would say that really very interesting to me was to understand, to see wide spectrum of even understanding of the topics. As Anne said, well, we are at least most of countries were motivated to develop and implement national qualifications framework because of the development and implementation of the European qualifications framework, where we were able to see, to discuss and to use common concepts, terminology, etc. But still, when we have started our activities, development of qualifications framework at national level, then a wide spectrum of interests, understanding, and development, even new terms, terminology, concepts were quite different. So it was really interesting to me to discuss with colleagues and to see, interests and also understanding, within the qualifications framework, but specifically here, of course, within the so-called, let's say, non-formal qualifications, which is really difficult even to understand. And then we can discuss how this will be difficult, when we are going to include them into the framework and to use them. Yeah. So for the moment, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sheila.
Okay. I suppose I agree with Anne's point as well. You have to have a system in place that fits your local needs, and that's probably why we have so many different variations. But I think it was really interesting, certainly for me, you know, from a framework that was in existence before the EQF came into being, and we weren't reforming, we were working with things that were already well established. It's interesting to see how a new young framework develops from the very beginning, and to see whether that then comes up with a system that's better than the one that we had to sort of amend and tweak to suit what we had already in place. So I think that's, for us, certainly very interesting. And I think what struck me was the wildly different approaches to cost within each framework, and some of the amounts that were getting put up on the screen. So it certainly perhaps gives me a bit of food for thought about how we, you know, charge institutions or don't charge institutions and organisations.
Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. Sylvia?
I work on daily basis with potential awarding bodies in Poland at educational research institutes. So it was very inspiring for me to see how national qualification frameworks are linked to validation arrangements. And it was very interesting to hear about Czech cases, because they have assessment standards different for each qualification, and this solution is very similar to Polish case. So for sure I will further invest how they design this solution for a particular qualification, because comparing with French case, they have these validation arrangements set for ministry, like for Ministry of Education generally it's portfolio and interview, and for Ministry of Labor it's generally portfolio and observation at work. So for us it's very demanding in Poland and in Czech to design these standards for each qualification, for each awarding body. So that was very interesting for me. And another case are Irish and costs. As I said about cost of inclusion of qualification, but I can add that there are also some cost for operating awarding body. It means 3% of income coming from
Poland, you mean?
In Poland,
yes.
Coming from certification should be paid for the system. So it's very interesting to observe this situation and the solution, how it will influence the absorption of the qualification in the system, because it's 3% and it's quite hard to foresee. It will be obstacle or it will be very small amount for all awarding bodies.
Okay, thank you. We do have some awarding bodies from Poland here, so we could ask you what do you think about this amount. Okay, thank you, Sylvia. And Matteo, yes, what did you find interesting in other cases?
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that it was very rich, very instructive to. So it's a lot of time that we work on our national report and we read each other, the other reports and so on and so forth. But I think that the exercise that we did today to sum up the main contents of our reports in a PowerPoint presentation is very worthwhile, because we had an immediate feeling of the diversity and of the different histories of the different systems. So I think that also for us, that we are used to work on our reports in the framework of the project, it was very interesting to see essential things on the PowerPoint in order to compare each other one more in a better way. I would like, if I can take a couple of minutes more to point out three things that it seems to me quite interesting and that were in the discussion of this morning. So three points that can differentiate the different systems or can categorize the different system, I would say. So the first point that I noted is the different approach to the object of the qualification framework. So in some country, like in France, we talk about certification, that it's something, it's a kind of, so it's an object that enable to carry out a profession, a full-time profession. So it's something that you need in order to carry out a full-time profession. And it's a real certificate, it's a real license, I would say, in brackets. In other countries, the object is not the same, it's more the programs. Programs that award a title at the end of the training. And this cleavage, it's very interesting because starting from this differentiation, you have different accreditation process and different quality assurance processes also. Because, for instance, in France, we talk, for us, we talk about certification, so it's we can discuss it, but most of people think that it's unnecessary to make quality evaluation on the pedagogical processes, because the important point is the learning outcomes, how people is capable to have the competencies and the skills to develop the tasks referring to a single jobs. So the French system is not at all interested to the pedagogical part, or how the pedagogic part is developed in the different institutes in order to achieve the certification. In other countries, we've seen that this part is treated in the quality assurance processes. So it's a very big difference. I have noted also other two differences, but maybe I stop here because I don't want to do...
Maybe just one.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
Then we come back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yes, Zoltan.
Oh, yes. I picked up 3 points as Matteo did, and I like to connect with the number of the stripes or our flag, so that's 3. And I think the lifelong learning market in Hungary looks like the Nottingham Forest in the Robin Hood tale, so that you cross the forest safely sometimes, but sometimes when you cross the forest you are robbed. So this is the market, so that's, you don't know really the quality of the training. And another introductory motive, in Hungary there is a common well-known phrase: when somebody falls under the other side of the horse. I don't know if it works in English, but or it exists. So that means when we do something, when we regulate, we over-regulate. When we don't regulate, we leave that alone. So that's somewhere within in our nations. So I think the qualification framework should be in the middle, when a horse rider can sit on the horse. And so that the 3 points or ideas what I picked out from the country presentation, and I can say it because we don't have really don't have a vision of the Hungarian qualification framework, a legitimate vision. So we can find routes how to position the qualification framework in our training market. The first is the Czech register, because we have a register for national vocational qualification, but that's closed for state-recognized qualification. And if I understand well the Czech case, they open this register with standards for qualifications that can be acquired outside of school system or something like that. So that one, I think that's an interesting thing. The other is the lifelong learning framework, the Scottish case, where the framework is open for organization or training providers to include their program voluntarily into the framework. And for that, they have to undertake some kind of task and undergo a quality assured process. So that in all qualification framework, there are around 1,500 qualifications, state-recognized qualifications. 700 higher education qualification, 600 vocational qualification, and there are some kind of others. But in the so-called non-formal qualification, there are only less than 200. So because the framework is restrictive and do not open the door for unregulated training. So that's this kind of voluntary open framework, and the idea for that it's interesting. And another, which I mentioned during my presentation, training providers and companies feel it's important to have a kind of sectoral framework under the overarching framework, which guides them to draw up learning outcomes and level their programs in accordance with the procedure. We level their programs with other qualifications or certificate, so they feel it as a reference point for quality assurance, transparency, and to make their training more visible for the future participants.
Thank you, and thank you for this anecdote. This parallel to the rider on the horse with the level descriptors under an arm. Yeah. Okay, yes, Jan, please.
Okay, for us, because we are in a slightly different situation than the others, because we don't have that national qualification framework. So when I'm considering the situation here, that we should think about to create one, all the approaches are unique and very interesting for us. But interesting for me is that in Ireland, France, and in Scotland, there were those qualification frameworks before EQF, before European Qualification Framework. But in Hungary, Poland, and Croatia, it was established because of the European Qualification Framework. We didn't do anything in Czech Republic so far, almost anything. But now, because I heard what's going on in Hungary, and it doesn't sound like really funny to me. So if we want to establish something, we want to know what we want to do with this, and how we can use it. And this is like my learning from this and understanding, because I think that in France and in Ireland, in Scotland, they did it because they knew what they want to do with this. And like Eastern European countries, they are usually in the situation, we have to listen what they want from us, so we should create, but we don't know why, but we have money from them, so we do something, blah, blah, blah. You know how it's going on, but we should know why and for what we are using the system. And I know that in Sweden and in Finland, they didn't have the national qualification framework, and I know that in Sweden they created it for 7 years. So it took 7 years to create the system, and now I think it was precise work, because that's what I heard in EQF advisory group meeting when they presented the referencing report, the national qualification framework. So I know that other countries, they did it in 1 year. So it's, you can sometimes a little bit see that maybe much more work, and the longer work, it's better than the short and fast work. For us, I think there's no rush, and we have some kind of system, but I learned from my colleagues that it should take time.
Okay. Thank you, Jan. And Matteo, you wanted to address an issue?
I wanted to react to Jan's comment, because it's something that is funny to me personally. That is this way that our Czech colleagues have to state clearly we do not have NQF. So Jan stated this very firmly, and it's funny because, for instance, in France we can say exactly the same. We can say exactly so, but we are a little bit more. I don't know. We cover this fault like saying we have the NQF is what we already have. So our NQF is the RNCP, is the registry. So at a certain point, without forcibly developing something similar to what is demanded by European Union and European Commission, we decided that we started to call what we already had in another way. So we started to say this is the national qualification framework, and this is the registry is the national qualification framework. So it's quite funny the different approaches, because the Czech, in a kind of honesty, intellectual honesty, say that we do not have it. The French say that yes, we have it. It's what we had before. So I think it's funny to see the different approaches of the different countries.
Yes, it is true. Thank you for raising this issue. And before we go to the next round, let me ask our dearest guests, participants, about your reflection. What have you found interesting in the presentations you've heard? Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I have several thoughts. My general reflection is that you've been very conservative in your approach. I think in Europe we should be bolder. My first meeting with the European Qualifications Framework was back 2008, and within a European Bank Training Organization for Banking Institutes, we read EQF. And we were depressed. We didn't understand a thing. But because we are from the business sector, so we think about applications. And I think if a new concept is born, you have several options. You can ignore it, you can misuse it, or you can use it in your advantage. So we decided to try to use it to our advantage, and as a European organization we created the first sectoral qualifications framework for financial services. Then we presented it in Poland, and I think there was an element of inspiration in Poland from this framework to include sectoral approaches into our system. So that's my first reflection, and an example that we can work together and deliver. Okay, but then I wanted to make 2 points. And I'm speaking as a Polish user of our system back in the country, but also as a European user of the European Qualifications Framework. On the first item, the situation in Poland whereby we say that if you invest in a qualification and then you apply with the qualification to the system, you've carried out some costs and then you lose the ownership of the qualification. It's not a kind of motivation that will really promote the system with entering more qualifications. In terms of the European aspect of it, and I was quite honestly, though because of my different roles, I've been trying to monitor the situation of EQF implementation in different countries. I'm still surprised how different the implementation's approaches are. And two examples, what kind of picture it is created because of that. Again, with one positive example. In the European Bank Training Organization, we developed a qualification standard, which is called EEE qualification standard, and it integrates EQF, ECVET, and EQUAVET. It's been in operation for 1 year only. We've accredited several qualifications, including Irish qualifications. And I would say that by the end of this year, with this standard, we cover some 70,000 certificate holders. And it communicates all the EU standards about qualifications. But another example, which is not positive. We have, and this, I'm talking about financial services sector, we have EU directives for financial services in the European Union. We have several EU directives now entering into force that for the very first time introduce qualifications requirements. And now they are being implemented in the countries. Those requirements set, surprise, surprise, minimum level of qualifications without using the EQF levels. It's very descriptive and very general. And now the local regulatory authorities, they interpret the minimum standards coming from the European level in the different countries. And when we are following the implementation regulations, they are all over the place. Not to mention that one of the key goals of the directives is all about bringing transparency to the system. So this is a situation where we have very good tools, they are in the law, and somehow we do not use them. And I think we have to work together to use them for the benefit of our citizens.
Okay. Thank you for this comment. Okay, I see that there is another one.
This is exactly the same problem, I think, but maybe another side. When the qualification became public in Poland, that means that everybody could approve it. Let's imagine that Microsoft is submitting his qualification to the Polish register. Then Google could certify it. It's possible in Poland. So you see that Microsoft will not submit any qualifications to Polish register. The same is for our linguistic certificates. So we will not have in our Polish qualification system very well-known qualifications in the world. So that's for IT, for linguistic, let's say for specialists, like in banking, the same. What we will have in our register, that's mainly craft qualifications, because they are local. You know, that's different to be a carpenter in Poland and in France, because you use maybe different tools, different systems. So you have to compare in the EQF what level they have, but that's a little bit local. So if it's really a goal to have such a framework in Poland.
Okay. Yes, thank you for these comments regarding the ownership of qualifications in Poland. Are there any other comments before we go to the next round with our panelists? Yeah? Okay. Just okay. Reaction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, and then the privilege of being
recently
in the
on
panel.
the Hungarian TV there was a movie. The original title is Highlander or something like that with Christoph Lambert. Yeah. So that's you know, he said always there can be only one at the end. I think this is not the qualification framework case. So that the framework is open. There might be sub-frameworks which can be applicable to the specific and particular needs, sectors, etc., etc. And I think which is important is to not give a huge burden, quality assurance, administrative procedural burden to the training providers. So that's this is something an important issue. If we want to open the door and accept different solutions under the framework, but that's slowly one framework. But it's overarching, this is a reference point, a national reference point where different frameworks can be linked, and that makes qualifications transparent and comparable with each other.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And
hello, I'm Zoltan from Hungary. So we are laughing all the day at the situation in Hungary, but it's of course it's not true. As far as I see, there's one common aim all the countries, just to provide the quality of the qualifications. And there are similarities and there are differences and different background, different heritage. For example, the Eastern European countries has a Purish and a Russian educational policy and educational system background and heritage. And compared to the Anglo-Saxon approaches, for example, for 20 years ago, we didn't use the competence, we used knowledge, we used skills and proficiency in something. So it's a pedagogical approach, and we have to get used to use this kind of methodology and this kind of approach. So I think if I want to summarize in one proverb, just to join you, I think the aim is clear, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments to this part? Or maybe do you have any questions to the panelists before we go to the next round? No? Okay.